I wrote my first book on emerging markets and development back in 1998, and I completely covered how technology was reshaping those countries and allowing them to sort of propel forward. And I had studied sort of all types of technological development over the last, 2,000 years. And then when I heard about blockchain, it was interesting because at first I didn't think of it as a separate sort of technology, and to some extent I still don't. I just see it as a piece of the internet, sort of a piece of this connectivity and this new environment that will allow us to safely and securely transact certain types of business in a standardized fashion. And as you heard in my speech today, standardization is one thing that actually really propels countries. So that was the real attraction to me of the blockchain, was the fact that, it's going to standardize the way certain industries are going to do business, and that's going to reduce cost, and it's going to increase economic activity. That was the real kind of draw to me of blockchain. Well, one of the things that I think people don't realize is that while inequality within countries is polarizing, but you forget that while within countries inequality is expanding, between countries actually we're starting to see inequality decrease, and there is actual convergence. And I actually see blockchain and technology as something that's going to help a lot of these emerging countries that have been laggards raise their living standards and their wealth, in some cases faster than what we'll see in advanced economies. Because keep in mind, if you look at Western Europe, Japan, some of the oldest economies and biggest and wealthiest are also some of the slowest growing, and they're depopulating. The populations are getting smaller. So I would say in 100 years, many of the emerging countries that I'm looking at now are going to be some of the most important economies in the world. It's where all the growth is. And so I actually see this little brief period where inequality is maybe greater within countries. It's going to be dwarfed by the fact that the bigger picture is inequality is decreasing around the world. Well, I think that you're right. It's not less to lose. It's just that there are less legacy incumbents, right? There are less strong operators in those systems and intermediaries that will resist the change. So in some respects, emerging markets will leapfrog a lot of the legacy setups that were developed in the US, Western Europe, and Japan, that will leapfrog it all and go directly to blockchain environment, which I think will actually accelerate their economic development. I think the problem with stablecoin is it's a theory. It's not what we've witnessed in practice. And I think it's unfortunate, but the huge volatility in the coin market has probably not done the broad blockchain industry a service, because I think that blockchain does have a lot of potential in the financial space. And, but the fact that you've seen currencies fluctuate, thousands of %, I mean, to be a stable store of value, these currencies haven't displayed the qualities that you would need to take on a fiat currency. I think one of the first things that I could cite, and again, I'm not the only one who's done this, it's my hero, Hernando de Soto, talks about it in his home country of Peru, in that land title, the land that farmers have been farming on for a couple of 100 years, and they built a house or built even a small factory on. Often that land, they don't actually have proper title or deed to it. Right. And as a result, they can't actually use that asset to leverage for finance, right? Because a bank needs to perfect security interest and ownership on something, but if you don't have the paperwork to say you really own it, then how will the bank realistically lend against it? And as a result, there's trillions of dollars, trillions of dead assets that have not been able to be securitized and put into the financial marketplace the way they have already in Western Europe, Japan, the US, Canada, China, and other countries. So I think to that extent can help overcome what often has been like poor governance, overly bureaucratic, in some cases corrupt regimes. So to the extent that blockchain could be adopted for greater secure record keeping, transparent record keeping, transparent and efficient shifts of ownership, all of that could do nothing but dramatically accelerate economic activity. That's why they have the greatest potential. Well, it depends what sector you want to first roll the blockchain at. If you just think of it purely for the financial sector, it might be limiting because governments may not want to cede the control for certain sectors. But in some cases, like if you have a national health system, right? A blockchain could be an unbelievably powerful addition to that system, because it will allow like expert record keeping and might dramatically improve health outcomes because all of the information is centralized and accessible immediately. So, again, I think that if you look through the world of blockchain only through crypto and financial goggles, you might see the limitation, like you might be limiting what the technology has the potential for, right? I mean, I think when people first had the internet, right? What did we think it was first supposed to be about? Maybe email, maybe chatting and stuff like that. And of course, what are we doing now? We're transacting trillions of dollars of commercial activity on this system. And so I think you need to think of blockchain in a similar way, which is actually, this could help even accelerate all that internet and digital commerce. I think you need to think of blockchain as this turbocharger for the digital economy. I really do believe it's these other spaces that have much more inefficiency that can be exploited by the technology. Because as you pointed out, there are already plenty of digital payment systems, there are digital custody systems to hold assets and move assets, and it's working relatively well. They're password protected, sort of coded, encrypted. Well, they're kind of functioning a little bit like blockchain without the blockchain technology, but essentially creating peer networks. They're not different from clearinghouse systems, but it's these other areas that have yet to think about how to exploit it, like the cotton industry, or the flower industry, or the clothing industry, or all types of shipping and logistics, where the paperwork that this could dramatically reduce could save so much time and expense. Well, I mean, you're exactly right. Like, we were talking about how many internet browsing companies were here in 1996 or whatever, right? There's just dozens in that ecosystem. Why Google would emerge, nobody knew. But I think you should look at some of the large enterprise software companies. Obviously, like an IBM is trying to become a big blockchain foundry. Consensus and Joe Lubin and the Ethereum movement, they actually have very good market share trying to, again, blockchain lots of different economic verticals. And I think that you should look to those sort of big companies that know how to speak to big companies, in terms of getting them to adopt different technology. Those are the companies that I think might be successful. So it wouldn't surprise me that a Microsoft or Apple, big software companies, eventually might have some hand in that space. Or maybe they acquire some entrepreneurial upstart that actually gets a head start in the blockchain. We forget about a company like Microsoft. Microsoft did not become dominant because they invented every kind of possible, service for their platform. On the contrary, they acquired a lot of little people and baked it all into their operating system and stuff like that. So don't count out those big software players. Well, I think that a lot of this questioning is going back to this crypto space, is that governments have been very skeptical and are trying to crack down on a lot of that kind of activity. And I think it's because partially you're treading on their space, which is fiat currency. But again, you should think of blockchain as being regulated just the way all economic activity is sort of regulated in their specific vertical. So if you're going to create, let's say, a new pharmaceutical, right, a new drug, well, there is a process in every country where you have to follow that. The interesting thing about blockchain is it will understand exactly that regulatory environment and actually figure out, like, maybe there's a way for us to streamline this process through the blockchain that could actually speed up the process. I think that's going to be probably one of the most interesting areas, which is how blockchain can actually accelerate product development and market development, where physical paper and very kind of bureaucratic processes, particularly at the government level, right, kind of slows economic activity. In some respects, people talk about deregulation. It's not really deregulation, but it's like, can we make regulation more efficient? That's what I think blockchain could really help with. And that's why I had also mentioned that if we could do that, we also could probably restore a little credibility of government, right? To say, like, yeah, no, government is being smart because they're adopting policies to help the economy, function better. I think it's one of these technologies where it can proliferate and mushroom very, very quickly. I mean, you're already seeing a few national health systems that are trying to set up a kind of a digital blockchain environment for national medical records, safe and secure information. And that is a very important space, because there's a lot of studies that show that bad information flow often slows down diagnostic processes and procedures and things that actually cost lives. So I think that's a great space where we're already seeing some countries in the Mideast and in Asia are already beginning to adopt blockchain environments for the national health system. I think it's a great experiment also for governments, like a good place to start wedging in, because I don't think anybody would disagree that most national health systems are very bureaucratic. It could actually use some help to make them more efficient.